Нам нет разницы, где умирать. Мы погибнем здесь, унося с собой соль.
Attention, history lovers and the curious about the past. Welcome once again to another intriguing chapter of Time Tale Theater. The attack on the Dubrovka Theater in Moscow left indelible scars on the heart of Russia. Suffering, uncertainty, and sacrifice intertwined in a tragedy that shook the world. The hostage-taking at Dubrovka became a symbol of the fight against terrorism and the heartbreaking reality of armed conflicts. Discover how the Russian government refused to help innocent people exposed to a chemical agent in this dark chapter of history. On October 23rd, a dark cloud of terror descended upon the House of Culture at Plant No. 1 in the Dubrovka area of Moscow, just a stone's throw from the venerable Kremlin. It was the night of the Nord-Ost show, an event that had sold out all its tickets and promised an evening of art and entertainment. But what no one expected was that shortly after 9 p.m., a group of about 40 to 50 masked and heavily armed men and women arrived in an ominous bus. With the roar of their assault rifles, they stormed the theater during the second act, sowing chaos and despair in a place meant for joy and laughter. The audience, trapped in an unexpected nightmare, reacted in various ways. Some tried to stay calm, others succumbed to hysteria, and a few even fainted. Backstage, some artists managed to escape through an open window, desperate for help. The assailants, dressed in black and shrouded in the darkness of their intentions, took between 850 and 900 hostages, including members of the audience and artists who had just moments earlier surrendered to art. In the midst of this nightmare, even a general from the Ministry of the Interior was among the captives. The leader of the attackers, with the cruel voice of uncertainty, announced to the hostages that they bore no grudge against foreigners, who, in a sad twist of fate, were also among the captives. He promised to release those who showed their foreign passports. At that moment, a silence filled with fear and hope seized the souls trapped in that theater, turned into a nightmare prison. On October 23rd, the House of Culture at Plant No. 1 in Dubrovka, Moscow, became the stage for a nightmare. Armed men, under the leadership of Movsar Beriev, the nephew of the Chechen rebel commander Arbai Beriev, stormed the place. The quiet night was shattered by the threat of death hanging over more than 850 people, including spectators and artists attending a performance of Nord-Ost. It was an event expected to be filled with laughter and excitement. The ultimatum given by the kidnappers was heart-wrenching: 1 week for Russian forces to withdraw from Chechnya, or they would start taking lives. The terrorists' words, recorded in a chilling video, spoke of their determination to fight to the end for their cause. They denounced the oppression and bloodshed in Chechnya, a place where innocents, including sheiks, women, children, and the weak, were victims of relentless conflict. Their desperation had driven them to this tragic alternative. Uncertainty gripped the hostages as they listened in terror to the demands of their captors. The conflict in Chechnya had exacted a heavy toll, and the hope for a just resolution seemed to be fading. The kidnappers, holed up in the theater, maintained control with grenades, mines, and makeshift explosives strapped to their bodies. Tension was palpable, and the hostages knew that one wrong step could trigger a tragedy. The Chechen Muslim community distanced itself from these acts of terror, condemning attacks on civilians. However, the danger persisted, and the hours turned into eternities as the hostages remained in the auditorium, with the orchestra pit turned into an improvised toilet. In the lobby, despair was a constant visitor, fluctuating with every move of the captors, who remained vigilant while watching the news and the media. Any spark of misinformation or pessimism heightened the tension, and the hostages found themselves on a fragile precipice, aware that a wrong move could unleash an even greater tragedy. Uncertainty and fear dominated the atmosphere, as the threats of the kidnappers hung in the air. Meanwhile, the outside world eagerly awaited a solution, hoping that reason would prevail and that the lives trapped in that dark theater could be freed without further bloodshed. In the early hours following the theater invasion, the attackers set a tragic stage. However, they released about 150 to 200 people in a merciful gesture, including children, pregnant women, Muslims, some foreign spectators, and those in need of medical attention. But the threat persisted, as the terrorists were willing to kill 10 hostages for every one of them who lost their lives if security forces intervened. At 1:30 a.m., a brave 26-year-old woman, Olga Romanova, crossed the police cordon on her own and entered the theater. Her intention was to urge the hostages to confront their captors. Amid the confusion, the terrorists mistook her for an agent of the Federal Security Service, FSB, and shot her, taking her life in seconds. Her courage and sacrifice did not go unnoticed. On the second day of this nightmare, the Russian government offered the kidnappers the opportunity to leave for any third world country, while the hostages, possibly under duress, called on President Putin to cease hostilities in Chechnya and refrain from storming the building. The situation even affected Putin's international plans, as he cancelled his foreign trip. The kidnappers sought to speak with political figures, including Iosif Kobzon, a member of parliament and a singer, and representatives of the International Red Cross. Some were released, but tension continued to rise. The third day witnessed negotiations and desperate efforts for the release of the hostages. Relatives of the captives demonstrated in the streets, calling for peace. Uncertainty and fear persisted. Akim Zakiev, a Chechen envoy and associate of Aslan Maskhadov, appealed to the kidnappers, while a group of doctors tried to provide aid to the hostages. As the day progressed, some hostages were released, but the relief was fleeting. In the darkness of the night, Russian special forces surrounded the theater, preparing for a confrontation. But the next day, tragedy would strike in an unexpected way. A mysterious gas filled the building, plunging hostages and kidnappers into confusion and panic. While some struggled to stay awake, others fainted. Security forces finally took action, resulting in a deadly showdown. The tragedy had reached its climax, with the loss of many innocent lives. This account reminds us of the horror of those dark days and the bravery of those who faced danger with the hope of survival. The lives lost will never be forgotten, and the lesson of unity and courage persists in the collective memory. At 7 a.m, when the morning was enveloped in heavy sadness, rescuers began the harrowing task of removing the bodies of the hostages from the theater. They carried them outside and lined them up in the lobby and on the ground, in the main entrance of the shopping center, at the mercy of the falling rain and settling snow. None of the bodies observed by the Guardian correspondent showed bullet wounds or signs of bleeding, but their faces were waxy, pale, and tense, with blank eyes. In a short time, this space filled with the bodies of those who lost their lives or became unconscious due to the deadly gas. Ambulances were waiting there, and regular city buses were used to transport the wounded. Medical teams were ready to treat the victims of explosions and gunshots, but no one expected what was coming. Hope was replaced by horror. The bodies of the deceased hostages were placed on buses parked in the shopping center. The initial reports did not mention any casualties among the hostages, and the families of the victims waiting at the university received news that there were no deaths among the captives. However, the harsh reality set in, and the first official report of deaths came around 9 a.m, despite the deaths of 5 children that had already been reported by medical staff. Nevertheless, official statements maintained that there were no children or foreigners among the deceased. Families of the hostages panicked when the government refused to provide information about the hospitals where their loved ones had been taken, or even if they had survived. The official death toll increased to 67, with the grim assertion that the Chechens had killed them. But once again, they claimed there were no children or foreigners among the deceased. As the hours passed, the official death toll among the hostages increased to 90, including 25 children, although they still claimed that the terrorists were responsible. Later that same day, the official number of fatalities exceeded 118, without providing details about the exact cause of their deaths. Confusion and the family's pain grew. 73 hostages, including 6 minors, received no medical attention. Some of them, perhaps due to their Chechen names, did not receive the help they needed. Furthermore, there were reports of money and valuables belonging to the victims going missing. The authorities claimed that an FSB officer was responsible for the theft, but he died in a car accident. Initially, Russian authorities denied that the deaths of the hostages resulted from poisoning, attributing them to health problems aggravated by days without food, water, or medical care. The suffering continued, and hidden truths cast darker shadows on this tragic episode. The dark memory of the tragedy loomed over everyone, like an unrelenting cloud of pain and despair. The raid came at a high price. About 40 terrorists and around 130 hostages lost their lives during that fateful episode. The nation's heart was broken, and the suffering was immense. Dr. Andrei Seltsovsky, chairman of Moscow's Health Committee, announced a bitter truth. Almost all the hostages who died during the raid lost their lives due to an unknown gas rather than gunshot wounds. The cause of death recorded in the documents was terrorism, claiming that they succumbed to heart attacks or other physical ailments. The reality was darker than they could have imagined. Among the deceased were 17 members of the Nord-Ost caste, including 2 young actors. Losses also affected foreign citizens, with hostages from Ukraine, Austria, Armenia, Belarus, Kazakhstan, the Netherlands, and the United States. About 700 hostages survived but were poisoned by the gas, and some faced injuries of varying severity. Even the brave Russian Special Forces agents did not escape tragedy, as they were also poisoned during the operation. Testimony from Professor A. Vorobiev, director of the Russian Academic Bacteriology Center, revealed the painful truth. Most, if not all, of the deceased lost their lives from asphyxiation, trapped in chairs with their heads tilted back or left lying face up by the rescue teams. In that position, their tongues obstructed their lives, silencing their voices. The gloomiest estimates suggested that the number of civilian deaths exceeded 200, with 204 names on a list testifying to the magnitude of the tragedy. However, a shroud of silence surrounded the true figure of victims of this deadly chemical agent. The shadows of the past still haunt the hearts of those who lived through that devastating episode. A dark backdrop of terror enveloped this tragic narrative, a sinister tale where nightmare actors participated. The shadows of violence spread everywhere. Chechen radical militant groups, the SBR, the International Islamic Peacekeeping Brigade, IPB, and the Ryadas Salakin Reconnaissance and Sabotage Battalion of Chechen martyrs rose as agents of chaos and destruction. In a shocked world, the United States designated these 3 groups as terrorist organizations, identifying them as perpetrators of numerous acts of terrorism and linking them to the sinister network of Al-Qaeda. But also, amid the darkness, a ray of hope emerged. The United States reaffirmed its support for a political solution to the Chechen conflict, urging Russia to seek a path to peace. Military Commander Shamil Basayev stepped forward, claiming responsibility for the incident and resigning from his official positions. In a shocking statement, he apologized to the elected president of Chechnya and separatist leader Aslan Maskhadov. Basayev justified the hostage-taking as a means to show the true face of the war, caused by Russia, and promised new merciless attacks. But the true drama unfolded in the shadows. Intercepted conversations suggested that Maskhadov knew the plans in advance, which he vehemently denied. In this grim scenario, Maskhadov and his representatives in the West condemned the attack and distanced themselves from the barbarity. They offered unconditional peace talks, a glimmer of humanity amid the darkness. This tragic episode was also a public relations disaster for Maskhadov, strengthening radical Islamic commanders in Chechnya. Violence erupted in Russia in a series of suicide bombings against civilians. Everything was falling apart in a kaleidoscope of horror. The shadows of tragedy and uncertainty spread as extremist leaders sought to provoke Russian forces. Behind the scenes, a sinister figure seemed to orchestrate the threads of this tragedy, and violence erupted on a large scale. Chaos left indelible scars on the memories of all who lived through this nightmare. The search for truth and peace continued amid the darkness. After the siege, the city of Moscow and the world as a whole were immersed in a mix of relief and horror. Moscow's mayor, Yuri Luzhkov, expressed his admiration for the special forces that carried out the operation with chilling brilliance. An operation that, while they wished it would end in peaceful negotiations, was forced into a final assault due to the unfolding tragedy. Abdulkakim Sultigov, the Russian presidential special envoy for human rights in Chechnya, described the bloody outcome as a lesson for terrorists and those who support them. It was a chilling echo of a conflict that seemed to have no end. As Russia grappled with the aftermath of this nightmare, the country was plunged into a relentless hunt for those who may have assisted the militants. Paranoia and fear seized the population, as Russian leaders called for vigilance and the reporting of any suspicious behavior. Russian President Vladimir Putin came to the defense of the assault with unprecedented violence in a televised speech. He claimed the success of the operation and thanked the special forces, Russian citizens for their bravery, and the international community for its support. But at the same time, he apologized for not being able to save more hostages. It was a moment of despair and unity amid the tragedy. This bloody chapter marked the beginning of a tightening of Russia's control over Chechnya. The consequences became evident with the announcement of new anti-terrorism measures and a large-scale military offensive in Chechnya. The conflict resulted in a new wave of refugees, leaving deep scars in the social fabric. International implications also emerged, with accusations and diplomatic overtures. The aftermath of the Moscow siege transcended borders and affected Russia's relationship with the world. This dark episode left an indelible mark on the collective memory, an open wound that would not heal easily. Amid mourning and uncertainty, Russia sought its path to peace and security. The dark curtain of secrets and plots surrounding the Moscow Dubrovka Theater Siege is woven with threads of intrigue and conspiracy. While the Duma rejected a proposal to investigate the government, a group of brave Russian politicians and journalists, including Sergei Yashenkov, Sergei Kovalev, Anna Politkovskaya, John B. Dunlop, and former FSB agents Alexander Litvinenko and Mikhail Trepashkin, conducted an independent investigation. Their findings cast a disturbing shadow over the event. They argued that the FSB knew of the terrorist group's arrival in Moscow and, furthermore, directed them to the theater through their own agent provocateur, Kompasha Turkabayev, known as Abu Bakr, a name on the list of kidnappers. The shocking part is that Turkabayev survived the siege. However, this story of deceit and double-dealing came at a terrible cost. Those who unearthed these truths fell victim to murder. Sergei Yashenkov was shot dead in Moscow. Turkabayev also died in a mysterious car accident in Chechnya. Pursuing the truth was a dangerous task. The revelations shed light on the idea that the FSB orchestrated the siege in a Machiavellian manner to achieve its political goals. However, doubts and contradictions also arose in this plot, such as the identity of Abu Bakr and his true role in the events. The independent investigation left no stone unturned and questioned everything taken for granted in this dark chapter of history. The Moscow Dubrovka Theater Siege became an enigma, a nightmare from which all answers could never be extracted. Amid conspiracies and theories, Russia experienced dark moments that questioned the transparency of its government and the integrity of its counterterrorism operations. Each revelation was a door to an even more disturbing world. The horrors of the Moscow Dubrovka Theater Siege were not limited to the hostage-taking and the final assault. The tragedy extended to efforts to treat the victims, where darkness and secrecy took hold of the scene. The Russian government refused to reveal what type of gas had been used, causing complications and confusion among doctors struggling to save lives. Official reports mentioned the agent vaguely as a gaseous substance, or an unidentified chemical substance. This lack of transparency raised doubts and concerns about the obligations of the Russian Federation as a member of the Chemical Weapons Convention. This treaty prohibits the development, storage, and use of chemical weapons that can cause harm to humans or animals. The convention, while allowing for the use of certain chemical agents for riot control, requires these to have temporary and non-harmful effects. However, in this case, derivatives of fentanyl were found in samples from British hostages. This raised questions about the true nature of the chemical agent used and whether it complied with international regulations. The shadows of uncertainty surround this dark part of the story, where the health and lives of the victims were at stake, and answers were hidden behind a veil of mystery. Amid suffering and chaos, the truth becomes a precious treasure that faintly shines in the darkness. The terrorist attack on the Dubrovka Theater in Moscow was a harrowing event that left a deep mark of pain and suffering on Russia's history. The dramatic circumstances surrounding the hostage-taking and the subsequent final assault left indelible scars in the lives of those involved, whether they were hostages, family members, rescuers, or Russian citizens. The tragedy in Dubrovka shed light on the devastating cost of terrorism and the complex ethical and political implications surrounding similar situations. The victims, trapped in a conflict they had not sought, faced a nightmare that many did not survive. The uncertainty surrounding the gas used, the motivations of the kidnappers, and the actions of the Russian government left unanswered questions. The story of Dubrovka serves as a reminder of the need to seek peaceful solutions to conflicts and protect the rights and safety of citizens. It also highlights the importance of transparency and government accountability in times of crisis. As we remember this tragic event, we honor those who lost their lives and share the suffering of those who survived. The Dubrovka tragedy reminds us of the fragility of life and the importance of working together to prevent future catastrophes of this magnitude. We hope that this immersion in this recent history has been a fascinating and enlightening experience for all of you. If you wish to continue exploring the mysteries and intrigues of other historical moments, we encourage you to stay connected with our channel and subscribe so you don't miss future episodes. I leave you with a video of a more recent event, as the Hamas terrorist group broke through Israel's defenses in a lightning-fast attack. We sincerely appreciate your company on this journey and remind you that, through understanding and reflection, we can forge a future where humanity chooses the path of truth and wisdom over darkness and secrecy.